All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're taking a deep dive into an organism that is a master of survival, a silent predator that can turn a source of nutrition into a serious threat. We're talking about Cronobacter sakazakii. It's a really fascinating story of environmental toughness, diagnostic challenges, and its devastating impact, especially on the most vulnerable. So let's get into it.
Just a quick note before we begin, all the information we're covering today comes from a comprehensive Gemini deep search of current literature and public health data. If you really want to get into the weeds and look at the primary research, a full list of sources is right there in the link notebook. I definitely recommend checking it out.
The folks who named this genus back in 2008 weren't kidding around. They chose this name for a very, very specific and honestly chilling reason. It's a direct and powerful reference to this pathogen's severe and often fatal impact on newborns. That really sets the stage for why our work in the lab is so incredibly important.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll start with the bug itself, then walk through how we identify it in the lab and discuss the clinical side of things. After that, we'll cover treatment and the ever-present challenge of resistance, then shift to prevention, and finally, wrap up with its role as an evolving public health threat. So first up, let's look at what makes Cronobacter sakazakii such a unique and frankly formidable opponent. This organism is an absolute master of survival that becomes a major problem in a very specific context. You could almost think of it as a sleeper agent, just lying in wait for the perfect, unfortunate opportunity.
So here's the rundown. The single most crucial trait to understand about this organism is its incredible resistance to dryness, what we call high zero tolerance. This is its superpower. It allows it to hang out for months, sometimes even years, in super dry places, like a factory that produces powdered infant formula. And that trait directly connects this environmental bug to its main vehicle, PF. Now, while it's an opportunist, it's the neonatal population, especially preemies, that gets hit with severe invasive disease. And pay close attention to that last point, the hypervirulent ST4 lineage. This specific clone is the bad actor behind the vast majority of neonatal meningitis cases around the world. Knowing this is critical.
Okay, so we know it's a dangerous bug. The next logical question is, how do we find it? Well, our ability to identify Cronobacter has come a long, long way, evolving from just looking at colonies on a plate to the absolute certainty of genomics. This journey is a perfect showcase of modern microbiology in action.
Now, under the microscope, it's a classic gram-negative rod. Nothing here on its own really screams danger, which is why culture characteristics and biochemical tests have always been so important. But take a look at that last bullet point, the capsule. Some strains produce one, and that right there is a major virulence factor, kind of like the bug's own secret weapon.
For decades, the go-to trait for a presumptive ID was its yellow pigment, but we now know this is a seriously flawed marker. Why? Because a pretty significant chunk of isolates, maybe 8 to 10%, don't produce the pigment at all. So no yellow doesn't mean no Cronobacter. This is where modern chromogenic media just shines. These augers are designed to exploit an enzyme, alpha-glucosidase, that all Cronobacter species have. It results in a really distinct color change, making it a far, far more reliable screening tool. It's just a simple, elegant biochemical solution to a big problem.
Chromogenic auger is a fantastic screening tool, don't get me wrong. But when the stakes are really high, like in a clinical case or a food safety investigation, we need absolute certainty. And for that, we have to bring out the big guns, molecular diagnostics.
And right at the very top of that molecular pyramid is whole genome sequencing. WGS is without a doubt the gold standard. It doesn't just give you a name, it gives you the entire biography of the organism. You get the species ID, you get the MLST type, like that critical ST4 we talked about, and you get a full rundown of its antimicrobial resistance and virulence genes, all from a single workflow. WGS can link a patient's isolate to a contaminated batch of formula with irrefutable, high-resolution evidence. It's a game changer for outbreak investigations.
So, we know how to track this bug down in the lab. Now let's talk about why it's so incredibly important that we do. We're going to move from the lab bench to the bedside, because the reason we focus so much on this organism is its absolutely catastrophic potential in newborns.
In infants, Cronobacter sakazakii typically causes this deadly triad of diseases. You've got systemic sepsis and bacteremia, and it's also associated with necrotizing enterocolitis, a devastating gut condition. But it's the meningitis that is truly, truly feared. Cronobacter has this terrifying ability to cause brain abscesses and cysts, which leads to profound, lifelong neurological damage in any child that survives. We are talking about a bug that can steal a child's future before it has even begun.
Let this number sink in for a minute. 42%. That is the approximate mortality rate specifically for Cronobacter meningitis. It's a staggering, devastating figure. Nearly half of the infants who develop meningitis from this organism will not survive. This just hammers home the urgency of rapid diagnosis and treatment. Every single second counts.
And this right here is the heart of the clinical challenge. The infection starts off with these vague, nonspecific symptoms. A little fever, not feeding well, maybe some lethargy. It can look like any number of common neonatal illnesses. This subtlety can cause critical delays in diagnosis, and by the time the more specific signs of meningitis show up, irreversible brain damage may have already happened.
So, how do we fight back? Well, treatment is a flat-out race against time, and it's made even more complicated by the evolving landscape of antimicrobial resistance. Let's look at the strategy, starting with empiric therapy. That's the treatment you start before you have all the lab results back.
Now, there aren't any guidelines specifically for Cronobacter, so treatment generally follows the standard protocols for neonatal sepsis and meningitis. Internationally, that usually means a combo of ampicillin plus an aminoglycoside, or if you suspect meningitis, ampicillin plus a third-gen cephalosporin like cefotaxime. And as you can see, the Dutch swab guidelines line up very closely with that. But the universal principle, the thing we all agree on, is that this empiric therapy is just the starting line. The definitive therapy absolutely must be guided by the antibiogram, by the results from our lab that tell us exactly which drugs are going to work.
And this is where the lab provides that critical, actionable data. Since there are no specific breakpoints for Cronobacter, we use the EUCAS table for Enterobacterales. So let's look at cefotaxime here. An MIC of 1 milligram per liter or less, it's susceptible, but the moment it ticks up to 2, it's considered resistant. These really precise cutoffs are absolutely essential for guiding clinical decisions. They are literally the difference between treatment success and treatment failure.
And this really highlights the commitment it takes to treat these infections. For Cronobacter meningitis, the minimum duration of IV antibiotic therapy is 21 days. That's 3 weeks of intensive treatment for a tiny baby, and it can go even longer if complications like brain abscesses pop up. It is a long, tough road.
Now, here's where things get really concerning, the resistance landscape. Ampicillin resistance? That's pretty common now. What's more worrisome is the rise of ESBLs, which take our workhorse third-gen cephalosporins off the table. But the true alarm bell is the detection of the plasmid-mediated colistin resistance gene, MCR 9.1, in environmental isolates. That is a massive red flag. It tells us that resistance to one of our last resort antibiotics is in the Cronobacter gene pool and could absolutely emerge in a clinical setting.
Okay, so we've talked about how to find it and how to treat it. But you know, the best way to fight Cronobacter is to stop it from causing an infection in the first place. Given how severe this disease is and the growing threat of resistance, prevention is everything. And this requires a chain of responsibility, from the factory all the way down to the kitchen counter.
So, a key thing to remember is that powdered infant formula is not a sterile product. Because of this, the WHO and the CDC recommend a critical control step at home. It's basically a simple pasteurization process. You just reconstitute the powder with water that's been heated to at least 70 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to kill any Cronobacter that might be lurking in the powder. It's a simple, effective step that acts as the final safety net.
Of course, the absolute best way to eliminate the risk is to avoid it completely. For premature infants, babies with low birth weight, or any immunocompromised infant, ready-to-feed liquid formula is by far the safest choice. Unlike the powder, it's commercially sterile, which just removes the primary vehicle of infection from the equation entirely. It's a simple switch that can make a world of difference.
So finally, let's just zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Our understanding of Cronobacter is getting better all the time, and public health policy is starting to catch up with the science. And this is where we can really start to make a difference on a much larger scale.
This is a landmark development. It's a really big deal. For years, we never really knew the true incidence of this disease because it wasn't being tracked systematically. Making invasive Cronobacter in infants a nationally notifiable disease gives public health officials the data they need to understand the true burden, to spot outbreaks way faster, and to put more effective prevention strategies in place. This is a huge step in the right direction.
So, that brings us to the end of our review, but I hope it's the start of a conversation. I want to throw a question out to all of you working on the front lines. What are the biggest hurdles you face with this pathogen? Is it the turnaround time for diagnostics? Is it clinician awareness? Or is it communicating prevention strategies effectively to new parents?
I'd love to hear about your experiences and insights, so please share them in the comments below. Your feedback is so incredibly valuable to all of us. And hey, if you found this explainer helpful, make sure you subscribe for more deep dives into the pathogens that matter most. Thanks so much for watching.